Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of the FOX43 Capitol Beat. My name is Matt Maisel, and joining us today is one of the budding social media stars on the Pennsylvania House floor. We're just going
That
to
doesn't
get right
speak well
into
for any of us. That's not good.
State Representative Mike Schlossberg, Democrat representing the Allentown area, passionate about education, just introduced a mental health resource bill, which recently passed through the House. We're going to get to all that in just a few moments, but I would be remiss if I did not wish you, sir, a Hag Sameach.
Thank you very much.
We are both of us are Jewish, and
likewise, then, of course.
Thank you, sir. Well, I mean, so I posted, we're going to get into the social media part of this as well, too, because I posted a video on TikTok last night that my family is interfaith. My wife is Catholic. I'm Jewish. And yesterday we always do the Christmas tree buying and decorating. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. And so yesterday, because it coincided with the first night of Hanukkah, and I say yesterday, we're taping this, Monday after Thanksgiving holiday weekend. It was just like super festive, and it was awesome. And it felt right. How was your family's first night of Hanukkah?
We actually have very similar backgrounds. So my wife is, I guess, technically Lutheran, but really nothing, but has always celebrated. We've actually celebrate very similar versions of Christmas, the Americanized version of Christmas. So likewise, now my kids are Jewish, they're being raised Jewish, go to a Jewish day school here, but we have the Christmas tree right next to the menorah. My wonderful Irish wife makes delicious matzo ball soup and potato pancakes. It's truly an American holiday in my household. And so we did the Christmas tree over the weekend as well. And then we said the blessing and lit the menorah. It was a very, very similar festive holiday. The in-laws left filled with potatoes.
My favorite part about and it's great to talk to someone, because I had no idea of your interfaith background as well. One of the things I love is that especially this time of year, just the traditions, and my wife and I were very upfront with each other from the start. Listen, when we have kids, we want to raise them with both traditions and the ability to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. My favorite part is when my wife reminds me of things within the Jewish tradition that I either don't know or completely forgot about.
It happens all the time, and we actually laugh about it. But there are some aspects of Judaism that my wife now has a better handle on than me. And, my Jewish mother is standing over my shoulder going,
right, exactly.
And we had very similar conversations. My wife isn't really any religion. That was something that was important to me, and she agreed to raise the kids Jewish, as long as, and the answer was yes, of course, but as long as they were also raised with her heritage, which my wife, if you ask my wife what she is more than anything, first thing she's going to say is Irish, which is why yesterday works. Potato latkes, potatoes, potatoes all over. It was really quite wonderful. But she was always very adamant that she wanted the kids to celebrate Christmas the way that she was raised, because it was an important part of her cultural and family upbringing. So, it leads to some very interesting moments. Again, you've got the Christmas tree right next to the menorah in my house. But what I will say is that both at the kids' Jewish day school and at my temple, there's interfaith families everywhere. Like 3/4. I'm on my temple's rabbi search committee right now. 3/4 of the board has an interfaith family. It's really, really interesting the way that has changed, even from our parents' generation.
Just the ability. You're right. From the generation, Lador Vador. It's much more open now, and the acceptance of it. And of course, it depends on some synagogues, whether you're conservative, Orthodox, Reform, depending on where you are. And I know we're getting deep in the weeds. People that are tuning in expecting to have a political conversation. Here we are talking about levels of Judaism, but it is kind of important and interesting to see kind of some places like my sister, for example. My sister and her husband, he is Jewish, but his parents are interfaith. So therefore, they were not able to be married by a conservative rabbi. Our synagogue's rabbi here in Harrisburg, we had to go to the Reform synagogue's rabbi, Peter Kessler, who is a great man. I'm not sure if you've gotten a chance to meet him through different events at the Capitol, but he shows up from time to time. But that being said, there are still levels of strictness depending on where you are, but by and large, the acceptance more than anything else. So, what was your? One more question about Hanukkah before we go any further. Because you and I are pretty similar in age. Our children are similar in age. What was your favorite gift?
And you asked me, and there's an easy answer. It was when I turned 9 and got the Super Nintendo. I mean, I still remember diving on that thing and then jumping off because I was terrified of breaking it and demanding that my father hook it up at that very moment so I could play Super Mario World for the first time. I'm a huge video game nerd, like besides social media, and I tweet way too much. But besides social media, my number one personal hobby is video games. And that would, as any video game nerd knows, the day you get a new system is a very, very good day. And that was a very, very good day for me.
We did not have any pre-conversation discussion or anything like that. So when I tell you that when I was 7 years old and my parents got me the Sega Genesis.
Same difference. Yeah.
And I was so excited to get the Sonic the Hedgehog. I was always if all of my friends had a Nintendo or Super Nintendo, I wanted to be the Sega. Just like whenever all my friends got the PlayStation 2, I got the Xbox.
Yep.
And so on and so forth. But that's fine. I lived on that thing, and it still is in my parents' basement, and I've been waiting until my son turns the right age to reintroduce that to him. Yeah.
The cool thing about the Switch is that you can play the retro games. So I've gotten to show my kids the games that I quite literally grew up on. So that's been fun. So that's really cool. They my kids can quote video games to me. It's frightening, really terrifying.
Are they old enough to understand or appreciate the social media aspect of how you have kind of integrated that into your job?
Yes, and I suspect we actually have very similar stories because, so I've been a state representative for 9+ years now. I was a member of Allentown City Council before I got elected to the House. So my kids are 10 and 9, so they never knew me not as an elected official, but trying to explain to them that this job's a little different than the average job. And, that's why when we're walking, someone will stop me and start asking me questions or saying hi or something like that. And that social media is a big part of that. So they sort of get that it's a little bit of an elevated platform, and they enjoy it. They've liked participating in it. I had a TikTok the other day where I got both of the kids. And I will add this, though, and this is something my wife and I were very big on as soon as they were able to be aware of the concept. I never post anything involving them without asking their permission first.
Yes.
And I think that's something that every parent needs to be really cautious of, not just with their kids, but not just for themselves, but for their kids, in that we want our kids to learn that social media is great. I know my kids are going to use it one day, but I want them to use it responsibly. I want them to never post a picture of a friend without permission. I want them to expect the same thing out of their friends. So anytime I post them on social media, I always ask them first. Now, it's led to some really, really amusing moments, especially at the height of the pandemic. I was doing a Facebook Live every day.
Okay.
And we did this for about a year. Now, we still do it 2 days a week, but so I do a Facebook Live where I would give the latest information on COVID, resources, answer questions. It was a Facebook Live so people could interact and ask questions. And that was it, first 6 months or so, it was out of the basement of my house, which led to some highly amusing moments, including when the dog would show up. Then there was a time my son was late for his online class, and he came downstairs to ask for help. I said, "Oh, Oren, come onto the video." And he sat down. He said, "How's school? I'm late right now. We have to go. Bye. Click." And, that's so they've been a big part of that. But I really want to always make sure that I'm careful with how I do it and that I get their permission first, always.
And that's the home side of things. But I also noticed that you use it real quickly. Go ahead. Feel free to plug your TikTok account now.
So I have gotten absolutely, and I'm almost embarrassed by it, but not really. So I'm Facebook, Twitter, and now TikTok. I've started using TikTok really extensively. I watch it all the time. It's like one of my top sources of entertainment now, but I try to use it. And when you use it, just like everything else in social media, you've got to have a mixture of it. So I have a piece of legislation, I'm sure we're going to wind up talking about, that would create a process by which counties and local units of government create overdose review teams and suicide review teams to examine the causes that led to an individual's death by opioid, death by overdose, or death by suicide, and recommend public policy changes. So I've taken a TikTok to explain the legislative process and try to demystify it and kind of get a little into the weeds with it so people understand how a bill really does become a law, and where that Schoolhouse Rock version is accurate, where it's not even close. But I also use it to mess around. I think the last TikTok that I put together was me at a ribbon cutting for new playground equipment at Central Elementary in Allentown, and kids putting me in one of those spinning things and just me going round and around and around and around. It didn't get me vomiting afterwards. Nobody wants to see that. But like, you can TikTok, just like any social media, but TikTok in a very different way really lets you get under the hood of somebody's life, and it's awesome. And that's one of the reasons it really appeals to me.
You mentioned the TikToks where you're explaining the bill. Have you received, because we start with Facebook and eventually everyone got onto Facebook, and then it was Twitter, and everyone's getting on Twitter, and we're still kind of, even though TikTok has exploded in terms of people, especially within Gen Z, you and I are both technically millennials, but we're seeing it more and more kind of grow into other generations. So have you started to see TikTok and that, I don't want to say acceptance, but more and more people within the Capitol kind of see what you're doing there, or start their own TikTok accounts because of that?
So I'm not quite on the front vanguard of TikTok within the Capitol. You've got a couple of my colleagues, like Jordan Harris, who's our whip, has been exceptional with it. And he did it. We collaborated on at least one so far. But you've got some members that are really, really cutting edge on it, and I am a little bit behind them. But yes, I had, in at least one case, I had a lobbyist tell me that they heard about a bill from my TikTok. So you do hear things like that, and it makes life interesting. And I'll add, it gets momentum. Just like any social media use, the more you use it, the more people find you and wind up following you. I'm only at like 230 or so, something like that now, which is a very low number, especially compared to my Twitter feed. I think I have 6,700, something like that. So it takes time to get started, but you've got to create that content to get the people there.
Can TikTok diplomacy be a real thing with working with the other side of the aisle? And I'm saying this half joking, half serious, because if you can have these fun videos while incorporating relationships with the other side of the aisle, is that something that you could kind of introduce down the line?
100%, because you do wind up building a relationship with colleagues. I mean, first of all, you interact with people all the time. I can think of one Republican, he and I tweet at each other on a regular basis, Jason Ortiz from the western part of the state. And we've actually gotten a better sense of each other's legislative priorities by following each other and responding to each other on Twitter. Now, there's going to be a lot of times where you wind up going your separate ways. Usually, at least at our level, you don't see kind of the food fights that you do at the congressional level on a personal basis. Now, it does happen. We are certainly not shy about attacking Republican priorities. They're not shy about attacking our priorities, although I would say their legislative accounts more go after the governor, which I get. But there's also moments where you can work together and you can kind of push joint projects and mention each other and highlight some of the things that you have together. Now, there really is a weird line, because there's plenty of instances where that happens, but there are also such very significant disagreements right now on things that I would say are as fundamental as our faith in the electoral system and as our belief in a functioning, thriving democracy, that it can get really difficult. And my struggle as a legislator has always been and I think it's everybody's, trying to walk that line, because I do pride myself on someone who's been able to work with Republicans.
You have good relationships with the other side of the aisle.
I think I do. And I don't say that based on just, wanting to compliment myself, but like I just had two bills that I was the prime co-sponsor, that I was the lead Democrat co-sponsor on, two really good pieces of mental health legislation make it out of the House with Frank Ferry, who's the Republican chairman of Human Services, and Brian Cutler, who's the speaker. Now, my policy disagreements with them are very significant, especially the speaker, but our obligation is to find those instances where we do agree and then move forward with them. And there's a tension, but I guess that's part of being in a democracy.
That seems to be one of the things, though. I mean, at least from the Democratic caucus's point of view, and other Democrats that I've spoken to, is that finding that common ground with someone in the Republican Party is at times the only way to get your legislation passed.
There is no question that that's the case, whether I like it or not, and I don't, but it is what it is. We're in the minority. That means that you have to, it puts an added emphasis on building relationships in order to pass pieces of legislation. I've been in the minority my entire career. I've had 3 bills passed with my own name. I had the budget proposal passed, and I've had other amendments and all that. If you don't figure out commonalities and figure out how to respect those commonalities, you don't get anything done. You will not get any legislation passed, period, full stop. I have no doubt that part of the reason that I've been able to pass legislation is because I do work well with my Republican colleagues, despite the disagreements that I may have. Now, again, there's where that tension kicks in, because you don't, when you have disagreements that are as significant as they are in some cases, you don't want to just roll over, and you have to stand up for what you believe in, but you also have to find those moments of common ground. And it is a very, very difficult dance. It really is.
Is there pride that comes with that? The not wanting necessarily to work with, if you have such a vehement disagreement with someone, and Lord knows we've seen so much of that disagreements between these two parties over the last year and a half or so. Does pride come in there? It's like, I am not going to work with someone on the other side of the aisle, even if I might agree with them on something here.
You know, it's only really pride if there's a level of personal viciousness, I would say. It's not like you've had when you get members that go after people on a personal level, and I don't mean me saying I disagree with Speaker Cutler's actions on support of voter identification, but I mean when you have people, for example, there's Republicans who have quite literally weaponized the opening prayer to attack new members of the Democratic caucus. Like, that's when you go, there is no conceivable way I could work with a person like that. Because if you have somebody that's willing to attack another member based on personal factors, that's like a full stop moment. And I have zero doubt that they feel the same way about some of our members. And, you know, whatever the differences are, I understand the line of logic behind that. But is there a personal pride with working with a member who you have a policy disagreement with? I'm going to say no, because we all have those disagreements. But for hundreds of years, American democracy has done pretty well with people working together on those moments. And the truth is, and I do think that my Republican colleagues would agree with this statement, the biggest things don't get done in Pennsylvania unless there's bipartisan support. So I've been a member since 2012, since 2014, Governor Wolf has been in, or 2015, I guess, Governor Wolf has been in office. The biggest accomplishments that we've had in Pennsylvania have had to get done through a majority Republican assembly and Democratic support. And that means that for things to get done in the legislature, Democrats have had to really carry a lot of the water, and that's okay. So it forces a very different perspective on policymaking, and it makes life a lot more interesting. And, you know, being a Democrat, despite our minority status in the legislature, because of the governor, because of our support for his public policy initiatives and vice versa, we've been able to move the ball on some of the things that we care about. Not everything, not even close. And I personally think we do much better with the Democratic majority, but the voters to feel otherwise, and we have to work within the confines that they give us.
Well, let's talk about something that you alluded to earlier, something that does have a bipartisan support, so much so that it passed the House 200 votes to 0, and that is the mental health package of bills that you were referring to earlier that you co-sponsored with Representative Ferry and Speaker Cutler. What is in this bill that will impact every Pennsylvanian?
So the two pieces of legislation that were passed, these two that we're talking about now, kind of lowered the bar on some regulatory hurdles that we've had in Pennsylvania. One of the things that our healthcare practitioners, insurance companies, and hospitals have all said repeatedly is that Pennsylvania's confidentiality laws are actually the most burdensome in the entire country. And this is true. There are only 3 states right now that go beyond HIPAA standards in terms of how we share information from doctor to doctor. For example, if you are in addiction treatment, practitioners have to go through additional hurdles and get your consent before getting access to your physical health records. That can be a real challenge, especially if you're, and the reverse is also true. So you could have a doctor who gives somebody who's been addicted to substances in the past painkillers, even though they shouldn't get them, and that could lead to an addiction or overdose. So these challenges make life much more difficult. The two bills that we passed from Chairman Frank Ferry and Speaker Cutler that I was the co-sponsor of reduced those barriers, and they made it easier for information to be shared from people who are in the mental health and substance abuse treatment, who are in mental health or substance abuse treatment. Now, there's still ample confidentiality. Federal HIPAA regulations still apply, so nobody's going to be running out, tweeting somebody's prescriptions on the internet, but it does make it easier for medical practitioners to share information and ultimately give better treatment. And that's something that we have run into time and time again in Pennsylvania. And I keep hearing about it from practitioners.
What led you to wanting to introduce this bill?
So for me, and this is actually, I think, something that might be interesting to folks. Well, first of all, I became involved with it with this effort when the Speaker and Chairman Ferry called me up and asked me to. I happen to be familiar with the issue because of past studies. So on multiple occasions, we've had studies done. We have an official study, our study body in the legislature that produces reports. So I actually, years and years ago, worked with the Speaker before he was the Speaker to get a study done on physician and practitioner shortages in Pennsylvania and why we had such shortages. One of my colleagues, Representative Jeannie McNeil, had a similar study done on mental health workers. Each report noted specifically that regulatory burdens on our doctors, including emphasizing specifically confidentiality laws, can be a huge burden to patients and doctors. And that's how I first became attuned with the issue. Speaker first asked me to get involved with it. I did a little bit of digging and spoke with our staff, and they highlighted some of the very specific things we could do, including this package. And that's how this one wound up getting over the top.
And now it's waiting in the Senate at this point. I mean, have you heard anything when this would move forward? Because something that is typically, majority vote in the House, a 200 to 0 vote in the House with a couple of no votes, not no votes.
Non-present,
not present votes. Typically, that would be considered a slam dunk in the Senate. It just takes them bringing it up. So, have you heard anything from that perspective?
I haven't heard anything. I think the fact that the Speaker's name is attached to the legislation is probably going to be a good thing. And I frankly would expect them to move it. You also had the fact that you had near universal agreement on this from a lot of stakeholders, and quite candidly, powerful stakeholders, is also very helpful. So I'm hoping that they move on it soon. I think the Senate is in at least one more time
middle
before
December.
The end of the year.
Yep.
If they move on it, then that's really fast. So I hope so, but I'm not optimistic there, just because it takes some time.
Right.
But we still got a solid year to pass this legislation and get it to the governor's desk. And the governor's administration was also involved in crafting the legislation. They had a couple of proposed amendments to kind of make it better, make it work better for them. So I'm assuming they're on board as well.
Something that doesn't necessarily have the same level of bipartisan support is education funding, which has been a major talking point every time the budget comes up. And you were part of the team that was able to secure, I think, $275 million additional dollars in the budget for public school education. And while that was approved by Republicans, they have been very adamant that we need more money to go towards school choice, private charter, type programs, scholarships for that. And I wanted to ask you, where is the disconnect between wanting to have, the money goes strictly towards public schools versus giving parents that option?
I think the disconnect revolves around, quite frankly, limitation of resources. Democrats like myself will typically argue that when you have public schools that are as vastly underfunded as they are in Pennsylvania and as unequal as the funding is in Pennsylvania, you need to do more to fix that system before you start expanding new ones. For example, in Pennsylvania, we are 45th in the nation in terms of state support for per capita spending. If anybody ever wonders why their property taxes are so high, that's it. We are also dead last in the nation in terms of the gap between the richest and the poorest school districts. It is something that I have said over and over and over again. We made some progress in this year's budget. The level up funding plan that I was able to push forward pushed money specifically to Pennsylvania's poorest schools, and that's wonderful. But we've got such a historic backlog, it's going to take some time before we can actually realistically close it. I think primarily that's where the gap is. Now, charter schools in general touch on a lot of very interesting philosophical and frankly highly problematic divisions. I'm lucky in my neck of the woods. We do have some charter, well, the vast majority of our charter schools, actually do a really good job. But the problem at the end of the day is funding. The Allentown School District is the sixth poorest school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It has buildings that have been open since 1870 that kind of sort of sometimes have HVAC systems that work. 1 out of every $6 spent by the Allentown School District is given to a charter school. It's absurd to expect the school district to educate kids when they're not getting enough money to begin with, and when like 15% of that money disappears right off the top.
So here's, I guess, the dilemma which I'm trying to see, because obviously I'm not in the weeds the same way you are from a legislator standpoint. But if what you're saying is this is going to take years upon years of addressing this issue with the way public schools are funded, and Republicans are saying, why not give parents that choice now to give them some of that money to go towards private options or a charter option? And I guess I'm asking you that question. If this is going to take so long down the line, why not give parents the ability to address that need now?
Because fundamentally, a couple of things there. First of all, a parent will always have the choice about what to do with their kids. As I said at the beginning of this, I send my kids to Jewish day school because them getting a religious upbringing was something that was important to me. But that's a choice that I made. It's also a choice that I fund, which is fine. I'm not asking anybody else to cover my kids' education. And there's the problem with charter schools isn't that a parent has a choice. They do have a choice, and they should have a choice. The problem becomes how that choice affects everybody else and the impact that has on funding. Because when a parent in the Allentown School District makes a choice to put their kid in a charter school, the vast majority of that kid's per student allotment from the state follows that kid. It makes sense to a point, but the problem is when so many kids leave the school district, it winds up creating a huge financial drain. It's kids going to charter schools and us not funding public education adequately is basically the equivalent of saying, I want my cake, but I would also like to eat it too. And I'd also like a slice of somebody else's cake. Because when a kid leaves a school district, it leaves a financial hole behind for everybody else that's still in the public school system. So that one kid may be getting to fulfill their choice, but it's hurting the choice of the 5 other kids or so who wind up staying in the school district.
Before we part ways, anything special planned for the next 7 nights of Hanukkah?
Like any other terrible father, I know my wife handled the gifts, and God bless her for it. I don't know where she has time.
Same.
I don't even know where I am right now. It will be, and this is an interesting part too. So, most of the Hanukkah gifts are smaller-ish.
Sure, you got to spread them out.
Yeah, exactly. Because you got to make them last, and then they also, they get their big gifts in Christmas. So I remember as a kid thinking, do kids who celebrate both get more presents? And the answer is, of course not, you idiot. Parents don't have all the money in the world, so we spread it out. So the Hanukkah gifts, and my wife, we did talk about this a little bit. She did such an amazing job with it. They're mostly like the cute, sweet, thoughtful gifts. And then Christmas is when it's like, all right, my son, we're going to give you Pokemon Sword and Shield that you've been begging us for.
Right, exactly.
So that's when we do that.
We gave him pajamas last night that said,
my kids got pajamas and fluffy blankets. Yeah.
It says Happy Llama, and it's a picture of a llama on the front. So because my kids are 4 years old and 21, 22 months old. So not quite your kids, but nonetheless, hey, you can catch him on TikTok, all over social media. Representative Mike Schlossberg covering the Allentown area. Thank you for joining us on the Fox 43 Capital Beat, sir.
A lot of fun. Thanks a lot, Matt.